For any of you who might have read the brief bio on Rick Moody that Michelle sent out with the invitation to today's meeting, you might have ended up feeling very unproductive, perhaps even incompetent. He has, among his former positions, been Vice President for Academic Affairs with AARP, Executive Director of the Brookdale Center on Aging at Hunter College, and Chairman of the Board of Elder House, now known as Rhodes Scholar, with which many of us have fond associations. His gerontology textbook has gone through no fewer than 10 editions, and his book on the 5 stages of the soul has been translated into 7 languages. He edits a monthly newspaper on human values and aging for 5,000 subscribers, plus a weekly newsletter on climate change and aging. Small wonder he's received in the past the Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Society on Aging, and was named by Utne Reader magazine as one of the 50 visionaries who are changing your world. Perhaps today he can change our world. We'll soon find out. Rick, take it away.
Okay, thanks very much. I don't know where to begin with this. Most of my life, I've been working in the aging business. I'm 78 years old this month, but I started out when I was 28 years old, 50 years ago. And I was always the youngest guy in the room. So it's a great pleasure. Maybe I'm the youngest guy in this room. I hope so. I'm speaking from San Mateo, California, which is, I've only lived here for a couple of years. And my wife and I, when we drove here in 2020, we crossed the border from Nevada into Colorado, into California. I was coming from Colorado. And all of a sudden we found ourselves in smoke. Everywhere smoke. And I got to San Francisco Bay Area, got connected with our daughter who lives here. And she told us that that day she'd been taking our granddaughter, who was age 4 at the time, to school. And in the middle of the day, the clouds were so severe, it was like night. And the little girl looked up at my daughter and said, "Mommy, why are we going to school at night?" And I thought that was my welcome to California and to climate change, because of course those clouds were from the wildfires in all throughout Northern California. I do know something about senior living, not a lot, but I used to live in a naturally occurring retirement community in Boulder, Colorado. And we were even on the list, waiting list for CCRC. And I became a non-resident member of Silver Sage, which is a senior co-housing community in Boulder, a great place. I spent a lot of time there. But I've never actually lived in a senior living facility, community, whatever you want to call it. The thing that I want to say about what I'm going to say today, and I'm going to try and sum it up as quickly as possible because I really want to get into question and answer, because you folks, what you're doing in the Kendall Network and senior living communities really represents something of incredible importance, because you're demonstrating on the ground, you're walking the walk of what needs to be done for all of us so that the world that my granddaughter lives in is a world habitable for human beings. I wrote an apology letter to her, actually, because by the year 2094, she'll be the same age that I am now. So that's another way of saying that we're preparing for the world of our grandchildren, but it's much more than that. I gave a talk a couple of years ago at a senior center. It was about climate change and all that sort of thing. And after the talk, I was, standing at the door, and older woman comes up to me and says, "Oh, Dr. Moody, your talk was just wonderful." She said, "I'm just glad I won't live to see it." That's what she said. "I'm just glad I won't live to see it." I was kind of taken aback and I didn't know what to say, but I realize now, several years later, what I should have said at that moment to her before she walked away. I should have said, It's not true that you won't live to see it. Don't be glad that you won't live to see it. It's already here. And if I were going to sum up everything that I'm going to say today, and I'm going to try and do it quickly because I really want us to have question and answer, because you are the folks on the ground, as I said, who are doing the work. I could sum it up in 4 words. Here, now, you, hope. And if we don't have all 4, we're going to miss the boat. We don't realize that it's already right here. You know, New Year's Eve, right here in San Mateo, where I live now. My wife and I barely made it home because of the atmospheric flood, atmospheric rainfall that was coming down. You've read about this in the newspapers, what's going on in California. It's true. But I thought, well, it's not going to happen to me. I'm a gerontologist. I'm a specialist in climate. Lo and behold, there we were. We couldn't get anywhere. Submerged cars, the whole 9 yards. Here, now, you, hope. So what's my message? My message is really one of hope. And if we did not have hope, we would end up being like the woman who came up to me and saying, I'm glad I won't live that long. She does not have hope. She has the opposite of hope, which is despair. That's not denial. She's not in denial, not after listening to my talk anyway. And there's plenty of people out there who are not in denial, but they're in despair. And the result of that is complacency, passivity, not wanting to hear about it because it's too awful. And the answer to that is the last word that I used, hope. David Orr, the environmentalist, put it this way. He said, hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. Hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. If you're not acting, then you're not paying attention. You're avoiding. And we know perfectly well, young or old, there's plenty of people who are avoiding. The people on this call are not avoiding, and you're not in despair. You may have fear, and you should have fear. Why should you have fear? For what I call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the climate apocalypse. I'm not speaking theologically. What are the 4 horsemen? Fire, flood, drought, and heat wave. They're all happening. And by the way, they're all happening to me right here in California, except for heat wave. I happen to live in a place where, here, we'll turn the camera around so you can see. I used to live in Boulder, Colorado, in a place on open space overlooking the Rocky Mountains. Best house I ever lived in my life. Wonderful. In a naturally occurring retirement community. Why did I leave? Mainly because of our grandchildren. That's why I live here. It's no surprise. A year or so after I left Boulder, you may have read about this, Boulder was itself, the neighborhood around Boulder, engulfed with wildfires. Wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. One of my friends was evacuated. Many people were killed or lost their homes. I left one place to come to another place. I was searching for safety. Doesn't work. There is no place of safety on planet Earth. Here, now, you, hope. Okay. What do I say about hope, and what do I say about what we should do? I was educated originally as a philosopher, although I haven't really worked much as an academic philosopher. I sometimes tell people I'm a recovering academic, but I sometimes fall back into it. So I'll fall back into it right now for a moment and say, maybe the greatest philosopher of modern times since the Renaissance was Immanuel Kant. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about Kant's philosophy, very difficult stuff. He said at the end of his life, when he was very old, older than I am now, by the way, he said, all of philosophy can be boiled down into 3 questions. What do I know? What should I do? And what may I hope? Epistemology, ethics, and religion, art, etc. Well, what do we know? I've already said the things that we know. We know that we're in the midst of a climate apocalypse, which will continue even if we stop everything today, even if we completely shut off all our fossil fuels. the oceans would still keep rising. That's why we sold our Airbnb right on in Hilton Head, right next to the water. Beautiful location, wonderful. I saw what was coming. What gives us hope? Well, let me save that for a moment until the end. Let me talk about what we should do. What we should do is the heart of the book that I'm writing. Yes, I'm writing yet another book. I'm not supposed to be doing that. I'm supposed to be retired. It's called Climate Change in an Aging Society, and that's the basis of the newsletter that I send out. And in it, of course, I talk about the 4 horsemen of the climate apocalypse, but I also talk about the 3 things where we can actually do something. What are they? Number 1, becoming a climate conscious consumer with everything that you buy. And that means energy, that means diet, that means how you get around. Number 2, it means having a green retirement. Anybody on this call have a pension, have retirement income? I work with people, yes, thank you, Mary. I'm working with Elders Climate Action and a project called Fix My Funds, which attempts, on the one hand, to persuade major providers, TIAA, Vanguard, those happen to be where my pension comes from, but also Fidelity, BlackRock, and others, to think in terms of divestment and think in terms of sustainable investments. Because if we don't, then future retirees are going to be facing stranded assets. And we can talk about that later on if you like. So investment for a green retirement is the second component. And the third is citizen action, which means joining with others. E.M. Forster, the great novelist, was asked once, what does it all boil down to? And he said 2 words, only connect. Only connect. That's exactly what we are doing now in different parts of the country. Everybody on this call is located somewhere else in the country. And what's the meaning of that? The meaning of that is the environmental slogan, think globally, act locally. Why is that? Because if you just think globally alone, you really will be in despair when you listen to what's going on in Pakistan or Bangladesh or the Marshall Islands. Don't focus on that. Focus on what is closer to home. That's what you're doing with stewardship in senior living communities. You're making the changes that need to be made. And I could add more, but I'm not inclined to do that until we get questions and answers. But I do want to sum it up by saying that there is no reason to despair. There's no reason to be in denial. It means that we can all do something. The doing may be mitigation. It may be working to prevent disasters. But some disasters will happen anyway, whether it's fires, floods, droughts, or heat waves. And we need to be prepared for that. I am sitting right here where you're sitting. You see me on the screen, 2 miles from the San Andreas Fault. And not long after we moved here, my wife and I put together our go bags. We haven't had any earthquake in the last 2 years, not in this part of California anyway. But during the time when our electricity went out, which happened a couple of weeks ago because of the rains, we were able to reach into our go bag and pull out a battery pack so that we had cell phone usage. Mitigation, yes. Adaptation, also. We need both. Don't think either or. Think both. In fact, in everything, think both and. That's what I really have to say, and I open it up for discussion. Michelle?
Okay, I'm going to remove the spotlight so we can see everybody. I'll
Very
look at all
good.
the people here. All right, if anyone would like to ask Rick a question or a comment, raise your hand, your real hand or your digital hand, and I will find you and call on you. All right. Anybody?
I hope I haven't convinced
Delaney.
you too
Oh, no.
quickly. Okay, great. Thank you.
Delaney, unmute. There you go.
I just would like to say that quote, only connect, comes from Howard's End, E.M. Forster.
Yep.
Howard's End is a beautiful estate in England, and it's beloved by several different families mostly because of its beauty and the plannings and the sense of being one with nature that the main characters in that novel feel. So that's a wonderful quote to think of in this context.
And I like his novels too.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that. Being a former scholar, I always like to hear about origins in all their detail.
All right, Ted from Lexington, and then
Can
Ted
you hear
from Oberlin. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. You mentioned the four primary effects of the climate apocalypse, but you did not mention species extinction
No,
or
I deliberately
disease
didn't.
and all that.
Yep.
Are those
Yep.
sort of secondary, or
No, they're
why
not
did you-
secondary. Biodiversity is extremely important, and you're well aware, I know, of the recent COP international event in Egypt, which was focused on biodiversity. In no way do I minimize that. I'm a former Eagle Scout, okay? I believe in nature in its fullness. I also worry about plastics. The reason why I don't talk about plastics or biodiversity is because they don't hit people in the face. They don't wake people up in quite that way. People can ignore it and not pay attention. You can't not pay attention to flooding or to fire or to heat wave and drought. It hits you right in the face. So the reason why I focus on those things in my book is, frankly, I learned a lot from Donald Trump, who said, MAGA, make America great again. I'm not endorsing Donald Trump, but I'm saying he's a great communicator and he grabbed people's attention. And that's what I'm trying to do. But I in no way diminish biodiversity. And thank you very much for mentioning it.
Okay, so I think that answered a few questions because hands went down. So the next hand up I see is Ellen from Longwood.
Could you say a little bit more about ACT locally?
Yes, and I'm very glad you asked that because I admitted at the very beginning of my talk that I never lived in a senior living community. Although I was on the waiting list and I was prepared to. I'm a big fan of senior living communities, but I also see problems with them. And it's in a way the same problem as a gated community. And my sister in Florida lives near a lot of gated communities. They want protection. They want to be with like-minded people, and that's perfectly understandable. That's the reason why Rhodes Scholar, in my day and age, it was still called Elder Hostel. We can talk about that if you like some other time. Of course, we want to be with like people, people our own age, for example. At the same time, I think it was Mary Burton at the beginning of this who talked about reaching out to young people. And I'm so glad that she mentioned that at the outset, because this is essential. She also said something else, I think something to the effect that we're not here in perpetuity. This is very true, okay? But we might not want to think about it. You know, for my birthday a year ago, my wife, at my request, got me a sweatshirt. And I should have been wearing it today. I'm sorry that I didn't. And it says on it, I thought growing old would take longer. And that really sums up my mentality. Partly because as a gerontologist from age 28, I was always the young guy in the room. I used to teach in elder hostel programs. I was teaching the old people, right? Not me. So you can perpetuate that idea that somehow it's them and not me. Well, we have a problem, not just in America, but in the world, of separation of age groups. And so the old don't understand the young don't understand the old. We need to be connected. I go out of my way to work with people who are, my friend Kevin Martinez, I just wrote him a letter of recommendation, 22 years old, from Berkeley. Ali Goldfarb, my new voice teacher, 32 years old. I work with her on Zoom. I go out of my way, not just with my own kids, but with other people's kids to connect. And that's the point of E.M. Forster's phrase, only connect. Connect across generations so that it's good to be in senior living communities, particularly Kendall communities, by the way. It's good to be there, but it's also good to reach out, never to be isolated. That's really what I was getting at. And this is so important because young people make the same mistakes that we made when we were young. And it's hard to correct that, because otherwise the old people sound like, oh, we know lots. Let me tell you how it is. This is a big problem. I sometimes say I try to follow Moody's 2 laws of advice. If you're not asked for your advice, don't give it. And I forgot what the second one is, but probably I shouldn't give even that advice. So that's the point. We so easily fall into giving advice. It's a big temptation with young people, especially. Anyway, I've rambled on too long, but I tried to answer your. It's Ellen Gay from Longwood. Longwood where? Longwood,
Pennsylvania,
Okay.
Philadelphia area.
great. I know it, right? Because I have Vanguard money, so I know all about the Philadelphia area.
Quite close to Longwood Gardens, if you've heard of it.
Oh,
It's-
yeah, believe it or not, we've actually been to Longwood Gardens.
Finally. One thing you forgot to mention among the elder community is our challenges with electronic devices.
Yes.
Anyway, I wanted to take issue a little bit with something that you said.
Good. I was
About-
waiting for somebody to take issue. Thank you.
You said, don't focus on what's going on in Pakistan or Bangladesh or the Marshall Islands, and instead put our focus locally. And I understand that and endorse it, but I think this is a case of not either or, but and.
Yeah.
We do need to take actions with our policymakers who are key to our overall approach towards climate change. So, for example, here we petition our federal officials on a regular basis on particular issues of importance for the senior community, while at the same time drilling down more and focusing on state and local and campus issues. But I did want to just challenge you a little bit on that first point about not dealing with the international sort of issues.
What can I say? You're right. I was, when I was at college at Yale, I was a member of the Yale Russian Chorus, and I still sing Russian choral music. I don't speak Russian, but I do speak French. Oui, je parle français. Je suis un abonné du Monde, Le Monde. So I subscribe to Le Monde and read it every day. I speak Persian. I learned Persian. Farsi, shuma Farsi baladid, man Farsi balada, chetar na. I am very interested in international affairs. I'm very much involved with Russian affairs and Ukrainian affairs, with Iran. I'm chairman of the board of the Rumi Educational Center. Every day, including today, I will be sending 75 messages to political officials, business leaders, media managers, advocating climate issues. Every single day I do that. And I've done that for the last year. And if anybody's interested in doing that, it does not take you more than 15 minutes or a half an hour. Send me a message and I'll send you how to do it. It costs nothing, by the way. I work with a group that mobilizes people to do this. I put my email address in the chat room. I will be glad to connect you with how to send messages. You don't have to send 75. You can send 5 per day. My response to your question is yes, we have to be focusing on international. We have to think globally as well as act locally. But we also have to realize that, and I know this very well from the fact that I'm interested in international affairs and have been since I was 18 years old when I joined the Yale Russian Chorus for precisely that reason. Most Americans are not really terribly interested in international things of any kind. We live in a country which is, despite seeming to be cosmopolitan, is actually very parochial, very limited in terms of our understanding of the rest of the world. Very few people speak foreign languages. Not even members of Congress all have passports and travel abroad. How do we overcome that? With difficulty, with great difficulty. But I keep working at it, which is why I send all those messages all the time. And it doesn't matter whether we succeed. We can't know whether we're going to succeed. In a way, that's the great thing about working on this issue of climate. The real payoff is going to be when most everybody on this call is no longer living. It's going to be in the year 2050, 2060, and so on. We're caring for our descendants. But again, how can we relate to that? People can't conceptualize that, obligations to future generations. There's a whole literature on that subject. You have to connect with your grandchildren. You have to connect with people, the young people who you can connect with, and use that as the entree to this wider arena of what is in the distance, either in space as the international or in time. That's the challenge. I don't have any magical solution to it. I'm just living the life that I live, trying to connect and make the world safer for Annalie, my granddaughter, because otherwise the world that she grows up in, that she flourishes in, will not be a world of flourishing. Anyway, I've said what I'm just repeating myself. Thank you for asking me that, for calling me up on it, because you're right. We can't ignore the rest of the world.
Okay, we have about 7 more minutes. Mary, then Mary Ann, then Ben, if we can squeeze you in.
Good. I'll try to be short.
Rick, I would value you saying a little bit more about what you have found to be the best antidotes to denial. I haven't done a study, but most of our Kendalls are located in areas that have not been hard hit yet. I'm looking
Yes.
out on a beautiful scene here. We have snow. In other words,
Yes.
it's still out there. Now, like you, I'm seeing them next week. I've got 2-year-olds that just got on cross-country skis for the first time,
Yep.
trying to keep up with their 5-year-old brother. You know, the thought of those children not having the sporting life is very hard in our family. I
know.
also think some of us, Rick, those of us who've gone to schools like Yale and Smith, were taught from first year that it was our job to perpetuate that institution. That's why we
right.
give, so that people will never see and never know can have the privilege that we had. And I wonder if, the privilege of life and life in all its diversities is something that would sell. But I would love that, because we are about 450 members. We are 4,000 residents. So we've got some recruiting to do.
4,000 residents in the entire senior living community.
Of all the Kendall communities.
Of all the Kendall, yeah. Don't worry about the people who aren't there. You will recruit them eventually. But in answer to your question, the real answer is success stories. The environmental movement has made a serious mistake by concentrating too much on disasters and not enough on success stories. In the next issue of my climate newsletter, I have a whole story about how international collaboration has succeeded in restoring the ozone layer.
Yes.
In the next 10 or 20 years, it'll be 99% back to where it was in 1980. Okay, that's just one story. Eventually, they're going to figure out in California how to save the rainwater and use it to compensate for droughts. Some people are already doing that. But you can't convince people to act unless you give them some hope that the action will have a result. So you've got to be very careful. The mistake I made with that woman who came up to me and said, "I'm glad I won't live to see it," that was my mistake. That was not her mistake. She had her own problem, but my mistake was just focusing on the problems, not focusing on the solutions. So that's my answer to how you do that. And I'm trying to correct for that in the book with becoming a climate conscious consumer, having a green retirement, and connecting with others. It can be done. I'm optimistic.
All right, next, Mary Ann Cadwallader from Hanover. You're unmuted, Mary Ann, go ahead.
It's interesting to me, Rick, that you didn't talk about the spiritual something that's very spiritual for me. And I think of this as an existential question, which is the natural world. And yes, inevitable changes are going to happen, but there's a lot of action that you can do around that. And maybe that's because of where I live. We haven't had one of these major disasters, but our love of the natural world and our desire to have it intact in some way for our children is what drives my my hope and my work in climate. And I thought leaving it out, it may not, I think it really is a moment, if we can figure out the way to talk about it, that it would reach the same people who have been affected by disasters. Thank you.
I'm going to try. You know, when this call is over, I'm going on to another call where I'm the opening keynote speaker for a global international conference. They're global, international, people from all over the world. It's not just the Catholics, but it's also the Muslims and the Jews. And I'm the opening speaker. This is at 9 o'clock my time, just a few minutes from now, actually. And I'm going to be talking entirely about spiritual. I wrote an entire book on this, The 5 Stages of the Soul, okay? I don't necessarily go around talking about religious things because a lot of people have kind of, how can I put it? They had an immune reaction against religion. So I'm very careful in how I approach that. But I'm going to be talking about the Pope Francis, Fratelli Tutti. He gave an entire speech, entire disquisition on this, and others have done that too. I'm going to quote Rabbi, see, I even have my notes here in front of me. I could give you my whole talk, but we don't have time. Rabbi Abraham Heschel, who said, in a free society, only some are guilty, but all are responsible. Only some are guilty, but all are responsible. The rabbi said it best. I'll give one more rabbi. This was a rabbi, I never knew Rabbi Heschel, but I knew Rabbi Zalman Schachter, okay? The guy who wrote the book From Aging to Saging. Reb Zalman and I, he's deceased now, we were in a restaurant years ago, and he said, you know, Rick, this environmental stuff is really very simple. The only question is, are you saved? And I thought, he's a rabbi, what's he talking about? He says, no, he said, I don't mean it in a theological sense. I mean it in a computer sense. Are you saved? Have you done your legacy work for future generations? And I thought, yeah, he's right about that. What is my legacy work? What is the world I'm leaving behind? That is the real are you saved work. And fortunately, there are plenty of people in the religious world and plenty of people who don't want anything to do with religion, who we can join arms with. Yes, Mary, jump in. I'm sorry.
I would just suggest that spiritual doesn't mean religion to me.
No, it doesn't mean. Okay. Right. It doesn't. It doesn't. Somebody the other day said to me, how did she put it? She said, we're just like people walking in the dark through a dark room. We join hands because we don't know where we're going. That's our situation. We're in the darkness. We're joining hands. Okay. That's what we're doing on this call right now. At this moment, we're joining hands with faces. And that's the best we can do.
It also lies in the natural world where we.
It also lies in the natural world, which is why I'm so grateful that when I look out the window right now, I'm not looking at the parking lot. And what can I say? You're right. You're right.
Okay, we only have Ben, one quick question, and then we will have to wrap up. You're muted, Ben.
You're the leader, Michelle.
Rick, you mentioned the besting of fossil fuels. Can you point us to a particularly strong, robust outline program, how to approach that issue as a person?
Yes, I put in the chat room my email address. If you send me a message, I will send you back, I promise to do this, links to a couple of places where people are working on green retirement. There are actually mutual funds that do this, and there are groups comparable to Morningstar, if you know what Morningstar is, that do assessment of different mutual fund families out there. So yes, there's guidance out there. It's kind of like Consumer Reports. They're not pushing something for their own benefit. I'll do it. Send me messages, by the way. As I say, I put my email in the chat, and I will respond to you. And if you're interested in a sample copy of my climate newsletter, I'll send it to you too. I don't send it to people unless they see a sample and say, I want to get this. Otherwise, I don't send it to them.
All right.
That's how I communicate with people.
I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate your time. I appreciate you. Look at all the faces that are on this screen right now. You are the people doing the work. I just write email messages to leaders and so forth. But Peter Drucker once said, great man Drucker, he once said, every great idea degenerates into work. And that's exactly what you're doing in your local community. The work. That's what I applaud.
Thank you so much, Rick. We are going to forge on to reports from the worker bees
That's
and
it.
then from the campuses. Good luck with the talk now.